The last day of Pompeii remains one of history's most haunting images. A thriving Roman city, nestled in the shadow of a volcano, struck without warning, buried in ash and preserved so completely that nearly 2,000 years later, we can still walk its streets. The image is so vivid, so overwhelming, that it's become all we remember. But it shouldn't be. No place can be truly understood through its worst moment alone. Tonight, we'll trace Pompeii through its entire existence, from first settlement through conquests and transformations, through periods of war and prosperity, through the forces that shaped it into the city it would become. We'll experience the eruption, not as the city's death, but as a turning point in its long life. We'll see how that life persisted in unexpected ways as the city continued to draw people back, refusing to simply disappear. We'll explore how it faded into legend, only to be rediscovered centuries later, reigniting both greed and curiosity, and sparking an ongoing struggle to understand and preserve what remains. But before we begin, I just want to thank everyone who's been listening, sharing thoughts, and patiently waiting for the next story. It's been quite a journey putting this one together, and I hope you'll feel it was worth it. Before there was a city, there was a mountain. It loomed over a coastal plain in sunny southern Italy. For millennia, it had bled fire, blanketing the region of Campania in layers of ash, turning the land dark and fertile beyond measure. But now it stood silent. Its fires had gone quiet. Its slopes had turned green with forest, and at its base, cutting through all that richness, the Sarno River flowed steadily. Into this landscape, in the 8th century BC, came the Oscans, an Italic tribe of farmers and herders who had made their way down from the surrounding highlands. They settled on a low plateau, a spur of ancient lava that had cooled and hardened into a natural rise above the plain, overlooking the river as it made its way to the sea. The mountain gave them everything. Its forests offered timber for their homes, and the hardened earth beneath their feet bore the weight of walls and hearths. But it was the soil that made this land precious. The volcanic earth produced harvests unlike anywhere else around. The olive trees they planted grew strong and heavy with fruit, yielding oil in abundance. The grapevines flourished, producing a dark, potent wine. They built their homes in 5 small villages, simple huts of wood and stone, clustered together on the plain. In Oscan, the word for 5 was Pompe, and so the place became known as Pompeii, a name that, at its core, simply meant the 5. For generations, the world of the Oscans was bounded by the mountain and the bay. Their lives were centred on the soil, on what the land could give. But the sea was a highway, and it was about to bring a new world to their doorstep. Around the year 740 BC, a profound and lasting change arrived in Campania. Across the bay, a new power took root with the founding of Cumae, the first Greek city on the Italian mainland. These newcomers were a different breed of men. They were not farmers from the hills. They were mariners and merchants, adventurers from a more ancient and sophisticated civilization, and they saw the world not as a collection of fields, but as a network of ports. For them, the mouth of the Sarno River was a perfect gateway. It was a calm, safe harbour that led directly into the fertile heartland of Campania. The Greeks came seeking the raw bounty of the land, the timber from the mountain's forests needed for their ships, and the surplus grain from the fields. In return, they offered the products of a more refined world. For the first time, the people of Pompeii saw fine pottery painted with intricate scenes of gods and heroes, a window into a universe of myth they had never known. They handled elegant bronze vessels, and they tasted the smoother, more delicate flavours of Greek wine and olive oil. But the trade brought more than goods. It carried ideas, a different way of thinking. Oscan craftsmen who for generations had shaped simple, functional pots now studied the elegant forms and painted motifs of the Greeks, blending foreign aesthetics with their own traditions. Leaders who had ruled by strength and custom began to witness another kind of power, one rooted in wealth and commerce. It was the beginning of a cultural fusion, a slow and irreversible blending of two worlds. The most powerful symbol of this new influence appeared in the 6th century BC. On a prominent bluff of land overlooking the bay, a great temple was built. It was not a simple, open-air shrine to the local spirits. It was a grand Doric temple, constructed in the pure Greek style. The temple stood as a statement. This humble Oscan town now saw itself as part of a wider Mediterranean world, a crucial meeting point between the earthbound Italic interior and the dynamic seafaring civilization of the Greeks. As the Greek presence solidified along the coast, a new power was pressing down from the north, a mighty and enigmatic civilization known as the Etruscans. They were master engineers, sophisticated artists, and disciplined warriors, and were poised to dominate much of the Italian peninsula. Drawn by the legendary fertility of Campania, they expanded south, establishing a great stronghold at the city of Capua. From there, their influence spread, and the small port of Pompeii was inevitably pulled into their orbit. It was not a violent conquest, but a political and economic alignment. The Etruscans were organizers, and under their sway, the agricultural potential of the region was maximized. Trade along the Sarno River grew more regular and profitable. The town's prosperity swelled, and with it, its importance. To protect the flourishing town and its growing wealth, Pompeii began constructing its first true city walls, a formidable barrier built from blocks of tufa, a soft, workable volcanic stone. They were designed with remarkable foresight. The enclosure covered not only the town's core of homes and workshops, but also a broad swath of surrounding farmland, ensuring that, in the event of a siege, Pompeii's inhabitants would have a secure supply of food within their defences. Capua's dominance brought uniformity to the region. Its artisans, its architecture, and its trade networks shaped the dependent towns that surrounded it. But Etruscan ambition was not content with the rich inland plains. They sought control of the entire bay, a goal that brought them into direct conflict with the Greeks. Their expansion was first checked in 524 BC, when a major land assault on the Greek city of Cumae was repelled. For half a century, a tense balance of power held. Then in 474 BC, the Etruscans struck again. They launched their fleet against Cumae and met disaster. The great naval battle ended in complete defeat, and with their sea power broken, their hold on Campania collapsed. The Etruscan presence faded from Pompeii, leaving behind only traces of their order in the city's walls and homes. With their departure, the long struggle for the region was over, and a heavy stillness settled on Pompeii. The stable economic system that had connected it to the wider world was shattered. Trading ships that had frequently crowded the river's mouth became a rare sight. Inland roads fell silent as merchants, wary of the unstable countryside, chose safer routes. Pompeii was becoming a place of stagnation, a provincial town overshadowed by its more powerful neighbours. This decline, however, would not last. From the mountains of Italy's interior, a new and vigorous power was rising, the Samnites, a fiercely independent, warlike people who shared a common Oscan ancestry with the earliest founders of Pompeii. When Pompeii fell under their control, it was not merely conquered, it was reborn. Under Samnite rule, the old Italic language was restored to prominence in government, religion, and public life. After centuries of Greek and Etruscan influence, the city's original voice returned. Stability and order followed. Trade revived, and Pompeii began to prosper once more. A people forged in the hard realities of mountain warfare understood that wealth invited danger. The old tufa walls were no longer deemed sufficient to protect their thriving city. The Samnites embarked on a project of immense scale. They raised 2 parallel walls from blocks of hard Sarno limestone, filling the space between with a massive core of earth and rubble. The result was not merely a barrier, but a rampart, an imposing ring of stone that encircled their world and secured the peace in which Pompeii could truly flourish. Behind the safety of the new defences, Pompeii's wealth and confidence grew. The Samnite elite, enriched by the agricultural abundance of Campania, began to build houses on a scale never seen before. Public life, too, became more refined. The Forum, once a simple open marketplace, was reshaped into an organised, monumental centre of civic life, while the city's principal temples were maintained and richly embellished. Pompeii now stood as a powerful and prosperous Samnite city, a thriving regional hub. Its identity was a rich and complex tapestry. Its heart was fiercely Oscan, its culture coloured by the legacies of the Greeks and Etruscans, and its body was clad in the stone armour of its new rulers. It was a city at the height of its power, confident and secure, convinced that its destiny lay in its own hands. But as the 4th century BC drew to a close, a new power began to assert itself on the Italian peninsula. It was not a loose confederation of tribes nor a chain of independent coastal cities, but a single, ambitious city-state, a people of soldiers, engineers, and lawmakers from the river plains of central Italy. This was Rome. Its expansion would be unlike anything that had come before, relentless and all-consuming, as one by one it subdued and absorbed its rivals. For the Samnites who now ruled Pompeii and the surrounding region, Rome's expansion represented a direct threat. What followed was a long and brutal struggle, a series of 3 great conflicts that would be known to history as the Samnite Wars. For more than half a century, the hills and valleys of central and southern Italy became a battleground. As a strong and loyal Samnite city, Pompeii was inevitably drawn into this fight for survival. Men marched from its gates to join the Samnite armies, farms were requisitioned for the war effort, and the people anxiously awaited news from the front. Year by year, the news grew worse. The Roman legions, disciplined and relentless, proved an unstoppable force. As the war progressed, the fighting drew closer and closer to Campania, and the shadow of Rome fell directly upon Pompeii. Around 310 BC, a Roman fleet landed on the coast near Pompeii and sent raiding parties into the surrounding lands, a brutal demonstration of how far their power now reached. Though local forces managed to rally and drive the invaders back to their ships, the message was unmistakable. The war was no longer distant. The Roman raid was only a prelude. Over the following decades, Rome's armies pressed their advantage with unwavering determination. One by one, the Samnite strongholds fell. Their alliances crumbled, their armies were broken, and by 290 BC, the long struggle that had begun in the mountain heartlands had reached its bitter end. For Pompeii, the choice that followed was stark: stand with their Samnite kin and face annihilation, or submit and preserve their people at the cost of independence. Submission was a bitter blow to their pride and heritage, but it was the only path to survival. Reluctantly, they chose to yield. Pompeii was not destroyed or plundered. Instead, it was bound to Rome by treaty, becoming a socius, an ally in name but not in power. The arrangement was a gilded cage. Pompeii lost the right to conduct its own foreign affairs. Its long-standing ties with other cities and peoples were now dictated by the Roman Senate. Most crucially, it was obligated to provide soldiers for Rome's endless wars. In return, it retained a measure of autonomy. Rome left the city to govern itself, allowing life within the walls to continue much as it always had. For the next 2 centuries, Pompeii lived in a state of uneasy peace. Protected by Rome's power, the city prospered. Trade revived, wealth flowed in, and its elite adorned the city with new monuments that reflected both ambition and pride. The first public baths, elegant temples, and a grand theatre that became the centrepiece of civic life. Yet beneath this surface of success, resentment began to grow. Generation after generation, Pompeian men were sent to fight and die for Rome. Helping to build its empire, but denied its rewards. They were allies without equality, their loyalty and their blood taken for granted. The peace held, but it rested on an imbalance that would not last forever. In 91 BC, the Roman Senate once again refused to grant the allies the citizenship they had earned with their blood. The dam of resentment finally broke. Across the peninsula, they rose in a violent, desperate rebellion. It was called the Social War, and it was a conflict that would tear the region apart. Alongside its neighbours in Campania, Pompeii joined the uprising, declaring its freedom from Roman rule. Within the city, the language of the conquerors was set aside. Oscan, the tongue of their ancestors, was restored as the language of law and public life, a clear and deliberate claim to sovereignty. The Roman response was swift and merciless. This was not a foreign war, it was a rebellion at the very heart of their power, and it had to be crushed without pity. The Republic dispatched one of its most ruthless generals, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, to pacify the rebels in Campania. In the year 89 BC, his legions arrived at the gates of Pompeii. In defiance, the men of the city took up their positions on the great limestone ramparts, ready to defend their home against the very power that had once guaranteed its peace. The assault fell on Pompeii's northern wall. It was the strongest section of the city's defences, and also the most vulnerable. While the other sides rose steeply along the ridge, the north faced an open plain, the only ground where Sulla could mass his infantry. The defenders knew it was their weak point. That's why they had fortified it so heavily. Sulla knew it too, and directed his full force there. For weeks, Roman siege engines hurled their stones against the walls. The defenders held firm, and the fortifications stood strong, bearing the assault with little real damage. But Pompeii's fate no longer rested on its defences. It was bound to the wider rebellion. That struggle was collapsing across Campania, its allied cities falling to the disciplined power of the Roman legions. In the end, the city stood alone, its walls unbreached but its purpose gone. There would be no relief, no allies left to fight beside them. The defenders laid down their arms, and the gates were opened. Pompeii did not fight to its destruction. Once again, it chose survival. Sulla's legions marched through the gates, and the city that had resisted for so long fell quiet. Its future lay in the hands of the man who had brought it to its knees. The legionaries patrolled the streets, but the city's final sentence was not delivered. Its conqueror was drawn away by larger conflicts, a vicious civil war in the streets of Rome, and a long campaign in the east. For 9 years, Pompeii lingered in a state of uncertainty. The great building projects of the past ceased, and the commerce that had once filled its port dwindled. It was a city holding its breath, its fate suspended on the fortunes of a distant general. Lucius Cornelius Sulla returned to Italy not merely as a conqueror, but as its dictator, the undisputed master of the Roman world. In 80 BC, his attention turned to the rebel city that had once defied him. The judgment, when it came, was not destruction, but erasure. He decreed that Pompeii be refounded as a Roman colony, granting it a new and imposing title, Colonia Cornelia Veneria Pompeianorum. This was more than just a name, it was a declaration of ownership. Cornelia honoured Sulla's own powerful family clan, a reminder of whose power now ruled the city. Veneria was a dedication to the goddess Venus, Sulla's divine patron and the proclaimed source of his victories. Pompeii now belonged to the Cornelii and to Venus. Its old gods and old masters were silenced. This silencing was far from symbolic. It was methodical and comprehensive. Latin, the language of the conquerors, became the medium of law, of commerce, and of public ambition. Oscan, which had been reasserted with such pride during the rebellion, did not vanish, but it was driven from the forum. It retreated into the quiet corners of the home, becoming the language of family and private memory. The next and most devastating blow was the confiscation of property. The great Samnite families who had led the rebellion, whose ancestral homes and fertile vineyards had sustained their power for generations, were stripped of everything. This property was then used to settle the final debt of Rome's victorious general, the retirement of his soldiers. Around 2,000 of Sulla's most loyal and battle-hardened veterans were settled in Pompeii as the new colonists. These were men who had followed Sulla across Italy and into the east, men who had earned their reward through years of brutal warfare. They were given the best houses within the walls and the richest farmlands outside them. They became in an instant the new ruling class, a Roman elite planted directly on top of the defeated population. For the conquest to be permanent, the still Samnite public face of the city had to change. The new rulers undertook the monumental task of reshaping Pompeii in stone, ensuring that its very architecture would speak the language of Rome. In the decades following, Pompeii became a vast construction site. Each new building was designed to project Roman power, Roman values, and Roman authority. The transformation began in the Forum. For centuries, this had been the centre of Samnite public life, a somewhat chaotic open space for markets and gatherings. Now, it was to be remade as a showcase of Roman order. On its western flank rose a new basilica, the seat of law and commerce. Beside it, the main temple was rebuilt as a Capitolium, dedicated to Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, the official gods of the Roman state. Together, these buildings proclaimed a new hierarchy of faith and authority, binding Pompeii's citizens to Rome through both law and religion. Alongside these monuments of authority, the Forum's new design also included a revolutionary public space for its citizens. The Forum baths were built, establishing a sophisticated new centre for communal well-being and social interaction. This was not just a place for hygiene, but a reflection of the Roman way of life itself, where physical care, leisure, and conversation merged into a single rhythm of daily routine. The new order had asserted its power in Pompeii's civic heart, but to truly forge a lasting community, its leaders knew that law and commerce were not enough. They needed to provide spectacle, a shared experience that could bind the entire populace together. In pursuit of this vision, a great amphitheatre was built on the city's edge, one of the first of its kind in the Roman world. This vast elliptical arena was designed for the brutal spectacle of gladiatorial combat. Elsewhere in the city, a quieter kind of construction revealed another side of Roman life. Next to the old large theatre, a smaller roofed playhouse, the Odeon, was built. This was a space not for bloody spectacle, but for the refined pleasures of music and poetry. It was a symbol that Pompeii was to be a city of both the sword and the lyre, of both brutal power and sophisticated art. The new Pompeii, with its grand public buildings and Roman-style forum, projected an image of order and permanence. But this physical stability proved a fragile illusion as the wider Roman world descended into chaos. Ambitious generals fought one another for power, and for decades the Italian peninsula was scarred by war. For Pompeii, this meant uncertainty and fear, as armies marched and loyalties shifted. The turmoil ended in 31 BC, when Julius Caesar's heir, Octavian, emerged victorious at the Battle of Actium, taking the name Augustus soon after and bringing peace to the Roman world. For a city like Pompeii, the arrival of this new imperial peace, the Pax Romana, felt like the dawn after a long and violent night. The fear of marching armies vanished, the sea lanes grew secure once more, and the trade that formed the city's lifeblood began to flow freely. Confidence returned, and with it, a new wave of prosperity. Pompeii's reputation grew, not just as a centre for trade, but as a fashionable resort town for the Roman elite. Wealthy senators and merchants began to build luxurious seaside villas along the coast, drawn by the region's beauty and its sophisticated Greek heritage. Their presence brought new money, new ideas, and a new level of ambition to the city. This new ambition found its ultimate expression in an engineering feat, remarkable even by the grand standards of Rome. Around the year 20 BC, work began on a great aqueduct, named the Aqua Augusta, in honor of the emperor himself. Its concept was revolutionary for its time. This was not an aqueduct for a single city, but a vast regional network. Stretching for nearly 100 miles, it was the longest aqueduct in the Roman world. Pompeii was just one stop on this great line, but the connection changed everything. For the first time, a constant and reliable supply of clean mountain water was channeled directly into the city's heart. It now gushed from public fountains in the streets, improving the health and well-being of every citizen. For the very wealthy, the ultimate luxury became possible, a private connection that brought running water directly into their city homes and to the grand villas that dotted the surrounding countryside. At the same time, a great project of modernization transformed the city's streets. Workers systematically paved the old dirt and gravel roads with heavy, hard-wearing blocks of volcanic basalt. They raised high sidewalks to protect pedestrians from the traffic of carts and mules, and placed large stepping stones at intersections, allowing people to cross the street above the flow of rainwater and refuse in the gutters below. This era of renewal also brought significant changes to spiritual life. To help unify his vast empire, Augustus introduced a new object of devotion, the emperor himself. A temple rose in the Forum, dedicated not to one of the old Roman gods, but to the divine spirit of the living emperor. The practice filtered down into the heart of the home, where families now added the guardian spirits of Augustus to their household shrines. The widespread stability of the Augustan peace transformed the vast Roman world into a unified and reliable market. A surge in production followed, elevating Pompeii from a regional centre to a thriving hub of trade and craftsmanship. The aim was no longer merely to live well, it was to supply an empire. This new ambition reshaped the very landscape. The old patchwork of small family farms was steadily absorbed into larger estates, consolidated under owners who treated agriculture as enterprise. Hillsides were terraced and planted with high-yield vines and olive trees, the region's most profitable crops. At harvest, production unfolded on a grand scale. The wine and oil processed, sealed in the familiar two-handled amphorae and stamped with the estate's mark, a guarantee of quality that carried the fame of the slopes of Vesuvius across the Mediterranean world. While ships loaded with the region's wine and oil departed regularly, others arrived with the materials of Roman luxury, blocks of marble from distant quarries for the city's villas and temples, crates of raw metals and glass, fragrant spices and resins from the east, and even wild animals destined for the amphitheatre games, all circulating through the city's busy docks. But Pompeii was more than farmland and harbour. It was a city of artisans. Its textile makers were renowned for transforming local wool into fine cloth traded far beyond the city's borders. Perfume workshops thrived, blending exotic spices with native flowers into scented oils. Metalworkers crafted bronze lamps and statues in busy workshops, while potteries produced vessels for every purpose, from cookware to the thousands of amphorae that carried wine and oil across the empire. Meanwhile, glassblowers met the perfume industry's constant demand for bottles, completing a near self-sustaining cycle of production and trade. The city's reputation for fine textiles, however, depended on more than the skill of its weavers. To prepare the cloth for market, it first had to pass through the fulleries. In these workshops, labourers stamped and scoured the wool, cleansing it of its natural oils before bleaching or dyeing. True to Roman pragmatism, their primary cleaning agent was human urine, collected in public amphorae and valued for the potent ammonia it contained. But it was another pungent trade that created some of the city's most spectacular fortunes. The city became the capital of an immensely profitable industry, transforming the refuse of the fishing catch into garum, the empire's most sought-after condiment. In large workshops lining the port, a foul-smelling alchemy took place. Fish and salts were left to bake under the sun, slowly breaking down into a potent, savoury sauce. Producers marked their jars with their names and the quality of the sauce, shipping everything from the cheap slurry destined for the army legions to the refined amber nectar prized as a luxury by the Roman elite. While export trades brought wealth, a more fundamental commerce was required to keep the working city fed. The daily bread came from bakeries that functioned as combined mills and ovens. They carried out the entire process, from grinding grain to baking the final loaf. The city also relied on thermopolia. These were hot food counters serving cooked meals to a populace living largely without private kitchens. So numerous were these establishments that they appeared on nearly every corner, forming a network of public sustenance for the great population of Pompeii. But a single, brutal foundation supported this entire engine of prosperity: the unending work of thousands of enslaved men, women, and children. Their forced labour was an essential component of every industry, from the fields to the city docks. The Golden Age of Pompeii, like the Golden Age of Rome itself, rested on a system of profound and unquestioned human exploitation. And yet within this brutal system, Roman society allowed for a single, complex possibility that shaped its very fabric: manumission, the act of a master freeing a slave. It was a difficult path available to only a few. A slave might be freed after their master's death, as a reward for a long and loyal service. Some, especially those with valuable skills, were allowed to earn their own money and could, over many years, save enough to purchase their own liberty. Freedom, when it came, was not absolute. A freedman remained bound by obligations to their former master, and the social stigma of their past would follow them for the rest of their lives. But this slim hope was a constant, driving force within the enslaved population, fueling a deep and persistent ambition for a life beyond bondage. This ambition was a powerful force in Pompeii's economy. While the enslaved provided the labour, it was often the freedmen who possessed the sharpest commercial minds. Having risen from nothing, they approached the marketplace with drive and determination, becoming managers of workshops, owners of trading vessels, and brokers of complex deals. The energy that had made Pompeii a household name across the empire did not fade with the death of Augustus. In the decades that followed, the city grew rich, confident, and perhaps a little arrogant. Its people no longer saw themselves as subjects of a conquered colony, but as citizens of a commercial powerhouse. Like any city eager to assert itself, Pompeii needed a rival, and it found one in nearby Nuceria. In the year 59 AD, this simmering animosity reached its breaking point. A wealthy sponsor staged a magnificent set of gladiatorial games in Pompeii's amphitheatre. The event drew enormous crowds, filling the stone seats to capacity, but the crowd was dangerously divided. Thousands of Pompeians came to cheer on their city, and thousands of Nucerians made the short journey to do the same for theirs. The trouble began not on the sand of the arena, but in the stands. It started, as it often does, with words. Taunts and insults flew across the seating sections, the passionate shouts of rival fans echoing in the great stone bowl. Soon the verbal sparring escalated. A thrown piece of fruit, a hurled stone, and the fragile piece shattered. Pockets of brawling erupted throughout the crowd. The spectacle in the arena forgotten, replaced by a real and chaotic battle in the stands. The brawl quickly spilled out of the arena's gates and into the surrounding streets, becoming a full-scale riot. The Nucerians caught in hostile territory were overwhelmed. By the time the fighting subsided, the ground was littered with the wounded and the dead. For the people of Nuceria, this was more than a riot, it was a massacre. Grieving and outraged, they sought justice from the only power that could overrule a city like Pompeii. A delegation journeyed to Rome to appeal directly to Emperor Nero, reporting the killings and demanding punishment. The matter was deemed a serious breakdown of public order and a threat to the Roman peace, prompting the Senate to launch a formal investigation. The verdict, when it came, was decisive. Pompey was found guilty of instigating the bloody riot. The sentence handed down by Nero and the Senate was not a fine or a reprimand. It was a deep and calculated humiliation. The city was banned from holding any gladiatorial games for a period of 10 years. The sponsor of the fateful games and those found to have encouraged the violence were sent into exile. The amphitheatre stood silent, its great arches empty, while life continued around it. The forum still filled each morning with the noise of business and argument. The baths still steamed. The temples still received their daily offerings of wine and incense. But the games had been more than entertainment. They were the city's defining ritual, the occasions when all of Pompeii gathered as one, from the wealthiest patron to the humblest spectator. Without them, something essential was missing. The city went on, quieter now, waiting for the emperor's ban to lift, waiting for the day when the roar would return to those silent stone arches. On the 5th of February, 62 AD, a roar returned to Pompeii, but not from the amphitheatre. It came from below. The people were accustomed to the earth's small movements. Minor tremors were a familiar part of life in the shadow of the mountain. This one began like the others, but it did not pass. The tremor grew stronger. The ground began to move in ways the people had never felt before. Not the familiar brief shudder, but a sustained building force that seemed to have no end. People rushed from their homes into the streets, but there was nowhere safe. Falling debris rained down from the buildings above, while the ground itself remained unsteady beneath their feet. Then the city began to break. In its heart, entire sections of the Forum collapsed. The basilica's columns cracked and tumbled. The Capitolium and other temples lay in ruins. Across the city, private homes and workshops suffered equally. Some reduced to rubble, others standing but dangerously unstable. The Aqua Augusta was damaged along its route. The fountains went dry and the city's lifeblood stopped flowing. The terror did not end with the main quake. For days afterward, aftershocks continued to shake the city, each tremor bringing fresh panic and sending more weakened structures crashing to the ground. The survivors remained in the open spaces, afraid to return to their homes, watching as their city continued to crumble around them. When the shaking finally stopped, a ghostly silence settled over Pompeii. Rubble choked its streets. The grandest buildings stood as shattered skeletons open to the sky. People wandered through the ruins of their former lives, struggling to make sense of what had happened. They did not see such catastrophes as random geological events. That understanding belonged to a distant future. To them, this was an act of the gods, a sign that the peace with the heavens was broken. The terror of the earthquake was soon overshadowed by the monumental task of rebuilding. For most of the population, this was a matter of immediate survival. For the traditional elite, however, it was a burden they were free to decline. These were the old land-owning families whose names had governed the city and defined its public values for generations. But their fortunes were not tied to this one ruined town. Possessing other villas across Italy, they saw Pompeii as just one of many assets, and a badly damaged one at that. Faced with the long, costly work of reconstruction and the weight of divine judgment, they began to leave. Their departure left a power vacuum that was quickly filled by the city's commercial class. The wealthy freedmen, whose fortunes were built in the relentless energy of the marketplace, enjoyed luxury, but never the highest levels of respect. Yet now, with their entire world tied to this one city, they were the only ones with the resources and the will to rebuild it. Where the old aristocracy saw only a ruin to be abandoned, the freedmen saw an unprecedented opportunity. They began buying up the shattered villas for a fraction of their former worth, realizing that prestige, which had always been inherited, could now be bought from the rubble. As these new owners took control, Pompeii's physical and social landscape began a slow but profound transformation. Aristocratic homes were no longer revered as monuments to the past, but reimagined as resources for the future. Some were converted into spaces of pure commerce, their private gardens repurposed for bakeries or fulleries, and their grand rooms divided into rental units. Others were lavishly restored, filled with vivid frescoes and ornate decor as the new elite sought to signal their rising status. Yet even as they rose in wealth and influence, Roman law imposed a fixed boundary. No freedman, regardless of fortune, could hold public office. That path remained closed, marked by the memory of servitude. But their children, if born free, were full Roman citizens, unburdened by their fathers' pasts. This reality gave rise to a new social strategy. Denied a political legacy of their own, these new elites channeled their ambitions into the next generation, funding the reconstruction of civic monuments not in their own names, but in those of their sons. In doing so, they were not merely rebuilding structures, but renegotiating the city's social contract and their place within it. 17 years after the Great Quake, Pompeii was a city shaped by three distinct recoveries. The most visible recovery was that of the new elite. Along the main streets, their wealth was unmistakable. Workshops and taverns thrived with renewed energy, their facades gleaming with fresh plaster and vivid paint. The grand homes they had acquired were reborn, adorned with frescoes in the latest, most fashionable style. Deeper within the city's residential blocks, a second, more modest recovery was underway. Ordinary families rebuilt their lives with pragmatic resolve, restoring their homes room by room with salvaged bricks and timber. These houses formed a patchwork of old and new, a testament to survival rather than status. But there were also places left behind. In forgotten corners of the city, abandoned homes stood as hollow shells, and older public buildings crumbled from neglect. This selective abandonment was most visible in the Forum. While the food market thrived, the Capitolium remained a monumental ruin, a silent admission that the city was far more eager to restore its wealth than its peace with the gods. Water remained scarce as the Aqua Augusta, crippled and under repair, delivered only a fraction of its former flow. Most of the old baths also remained closed, but in some quarters the city was already looking beyond immediate repairs. The new central baths were rising where an entire block of homes had been demolished to make way. With its vast gymnasium and tall sunlit chambers, the complex aimed to eclipse every bathhouse that came before it. Though still just a skeleton of arches and walls, the structure stood as a bold symbol of Pompeii's bright future and the enduring legacy its wealthy patrons were determined to cement. While the physical scars of the earthquake remained visible, the social wounds left by the riot were now fully healed. The amphitheatre had settled back into its natural rhythm, drawing spectators from Pompeii and beyond. The years of shame had faded, replaced by the collective roar of a crowd reclaiming its favourite pastime. Alongside the grand spectacles of the arena, a very different kind of public expression unfolded on the city's walls. Painted slogans promoted political candidates, advertised upcoming games, and celebrated the generosity of their sponsors. Scratched into the plaster around them were more personal expressions, declarations of love and longing, insults aimed at rivals or local officials, crude jokes exchanged between strangers, and even customer feedback, from outrage over watered-down wine in taverns to glowing praise for services received in brothels. This ongoing citywide dialogue revealed a literate community where everyone, from the highest magistrate to the humblest citizen, felt they had a voice and the right to make it heard. This vibrant human world, so consumed with its own daily passions and politics, unfolded in the constant, quiet presence of the mountain. And during these years of rebuilding, it sent warnings. Minor earth tremors occurred frequently, so common that the people had learned to live with them again. Reports told of springs and wells that had flowed for generations suddenly running dry. But no one in Pompeii understood these signs for what they were. They saw them not as the precursors to a cataclysm, but simply as the quirks of a restless landscape. Across the bay from Pompeii, At the naval base of Misenum lived a man who had dedicated his life to understanding the natural world. His name was Gaius Plinius Secundus, known to history as Pliny the Elder. As commander of the Roman fleet, his duty was to the sea, but his passion was for the earth, its creatures, and its phenomena. His great work, the Naturalis Historia, was a monumental attempt to catalogue all that was known of the natural world. If any man in the Roman Empire was equipped to understand the events that were about to unfold, it was him. And yet, he was as blind to the coming danger as everyone else. To Pliny, and to all Romans, the great mountain that dominated the landscape was simply Vesuvius, a peaceful, vine-covered peak. It was a feature of the landscape, not a threat. It had slept for so long that the memory of its last fire had passed from the world of men into the realm of geological time. In the year 79 AD, the mountain awoke. Pliny and his nephew were observing the sky when they saw a cloud of a size and shape they had never seen before. It rose from the summit of Vesuvius on a tall, dark trunk and then spread out into a massive canopy, a form the younger Pliny could best compare to a great Mediterranean umbrella pine. For Pliny the Elder, this was a natural phenomenon that demanded investigation. His scientific curiosity was sparked, and he ordered a fast boat to be prepared for a closer look. But just as he was about to depart, a frantic message arrived. It was from a friend, a woman trapped in her seaside villa on the coast directly below the mountain. In that instant, a scientific inquiry became a naval rescue mission. Pliny ordered his fleet to be launched, not to fight an enemy, but to evacuate the densely populated coastline that lay directly in the path of the danger. The great warships pushed out from the harbour at Misenum. As they drew toward the coast, the mission became an ordeal. A fine grey ash began to cover the decks, soon joined by a hail of lightweight pumice. The sea was choked with floating volcanic debris, and the shoreline itself was changing as fire-scorched stones piled up along the beaches. Unable to make a landing, Pliny ordered the fleet to change course and sail down the coast toward the town of Stabiae. He landed at the villa of another friend, whom he found in a state of terror. To calm the man, Pliny embraced him, and with a show of cheerfulness, or at least a masterful imitation of it, he called for a bath, then dined as if unconcerned. Meanwhile, the prevailing wind carried the vast cloud directly over Pompeii, unleashing a downpour of pumice and ash that plunged the city into a suffocating darkness. The debris fell with such density that it began to accumulate everywhere, filling streets and courtyards and piling up on rooftops. People were forced to choose between sheltering in their homes or fleeing through a storm of hot, coarse gravel raining from the sky. The volcanic rock was light, but the sheer amount of it became a deadly threat. As the layers deepened, the debris rose against the doors, sealing the exits. Those who chose to stay inside now found themselves trapped, and could only listen as the timbers overhead groaned under the immense strain. The structures eventually gave way, and heavy roofs came crashing down on the families who had trusted their homes to protect them. On the other side of the mountain, a different and far swifter terror unfolded. Late in the night, the great eruption column collapsed, sending an avalanche of superheated gas and ash roaring down the western slope. This first pyroclastic surge annihilated the town of Herculaneum. Hundreds of its inhabitants, who in the desperate hope of being rescued by sea had fled to the waterfront, were killed instantly. Not long after, a second and still greater surge followed, burying Herculaneum completely. The morning of the second day brought no dawn, only a heavy gloom. The ground kept shaking, and the villa where Pliny the Elder was staying no longer felt safe. He and his companions tied pillows to their heads to protect themselves from falling pumice and went down to the shore, but the sea was still too rough to leave. Around this time, the third surge broke from the eruption column. This one raced toward Pompeii and crashed against the city's northern walls. The fourth followed soon after, powerful enough to sweep over the city in a deep, scorching wave. All who were still trapped inside, huddled in their homes or fighting their way through the darkness, died within seconds. On the shore at Stabiae, the air grew thicker with ash and fumes. Pliny, burdened by a lifelong weakness of the lungs, began to struggle. He called for cold water and lay down to rest, but the relief did not come. When the next advancing surge drove his companions to flight, he could not follow. He collapsed back to the ground and died. At Misenum, the tremors had grown so violent that Pliny the Younger and his mother resolved to leave the town. As they made their way along the road, surrounded by a terrified crowd, they felt the violence closing in with every moment. The water began to pull away from the shore, as if in a great inhalation, leaving sea creatures stranded on the dry sand. Then a vast black cloud came rolling across the bay like a flood, swallowing the land, the sea, and the horizon. As it reached Misenum, panic swept through the crowd. The darkness was so complete that no one could tell who stood beside them. People shouted for their loved ones, begged for help, and prayed in despair. Many believed that there were no gods left, and that the final night had come upon the world. But the night was not final, and the darkness slowly lifted. The people of Misenum soon walked back through the settling ash to reclaim their homes and resume their lives. Across the bay, however, no such return was possible. In just a single day, Pompeii passed from a bustling city to a tomb. Its houses and temples, its streets and gardens, its centuries of vibrant history now lay buried beneath a barren wasteland of rock and ash. While the city of Pompeii vanished from the face of the earth, most of its people did not. The eruption, for all its violence, unfolded over many hours. As the steady fall of pumice became a trap for those who lingered, it gave others precious time to escape. The majority of Pompeii's inhabitants successfully fled in the early hours of the catastrophe, becoming a great wave of refugees spreading out into the surrounding countryside. Those left behind were largely the ones who made the fateful choice to shelter in their homes, or who found themselves trapped by circumstance before the final lethal phase began. This flood of refugees created a crisis of staggering proportions. In response, Emperor Titus travelled to Campania to witness the devastation and organise a relief effort. His officials surveyed the site and quickly concluded that the city lay buried too deeply and the task of excavation and rebuilding was beyond their means. But this did not leave Pompeii to rest in silence. A decision was made to reclaim the city's buried wealth to fund the resettlement of the survivors. Over the following months, salvage teams guided by visible walls and columns tunnelled into the ruins. They focused on the forum, temples and other public buildings, stripping them of marble facings, bronze statues and lead piping. They also dug into wealthy private homes of those who had perished, breaking open strong boxes to retrieve the fortunes left without owners. It was a slow and dangerous undertaking, and the last coordinated effort to make the city provide for its people. As the years passed, the eruption began to fade from living memory, but in Rome, the historian Cornelius Tacitus was determined to preserve it. While compiling his great work, the Histories, he sought a definitive account of the catastrophe, and especially of the death of the great scholar, Pliny the Elder. A quarter of a century after the event, he turned to his friend, Pliny the Younger. The scholar's nephew, now a distinguished official in the capital, was the one man who could tell the story. At the request of Tacitus, Pliny composed 2 detailed letters to create the only surviving eyewitness account of the eruption. Meanwhile, on the buried landscape of Pompeii, the site was not entirely empty. A small community of survivors with nowhere else to go had returned to live on top of the very ground that had become a tomb, making their homes in the upper floors of buildings that were still accessible above the ash. From within their new living quarters, they could still reach the buried ground floors, turning the rooms beneath into their cellars. Here in the darkness, they built simple ovens and mills, providing the essentials for their daily survival. It was a crude and precarious settlement, a community of squatters clinging to the remnants of a lost city. This fragile existence continued for centuries, persisting even through the slow decline of the empire. But their endurance gave way when in 472 AD, another eruption of Vesuvius sent a new wave of ash across the region. The mountain delivered the final blow, driving the last inhabitants away and snapping the thread that still bound Pompeii to the living world. In the centuries that followed, Pompeii underwent its strangest transformation. It became a story without a place. The Western Roman Empire collapsed, and with it, the great administrative networks that had once preserved its memory. Nature reclaimed the landscape. Wild grasses, then shrubs, and finally trees took root. Eventually, farmers returned, planting new vineyards and olive groves on the fertile slopes of the mound. Pompeii quietly rejoined the productive Campanian countryside. But for more than 1,000 years, locals knew it only as La Civita, the city, a faint folk memory of a buried life beneath their feet. Meanwhile, in monasteries far away, monks copied the ancient letters of Pliny the Younger, preserving the dramatic account of the eruption. In a strange paradox, the world remembered the cataclysm, but had forgotten the city. Pompeii existed only as a ghost in an ancient text, its body lost to time, waiting for the moment when story and place would meet again. The world's first brush with the forgotten city came blindly. In the late 16th century, architect Domenico Fontana was redirecting the Sarno River, cutting a new channel directly through the buried ruins. During the project, workers stumbled upon ancient walls still adorned with painted frescoes. They also uncovered inscriptions, including a stone bearing the words De Curio Pompeius, a direct reference to a Pompeian town councillor. The city had revealed a clue to its identity, yet the world failed to recognize it. Scholars mistook Pompeius for a reference to the Roman general Pompey the Great, dismissing the site as the remnants of a private villa. Fontana completed the project and reburied the ruins, leaving the city to its slumber for another 150 years. Pompeii's rediscovery began with events at Herculaneum. In 1709, a local farmer digging a well came upon fragments of ancient stone and marble. The find drew the attention of a French nobleman, Emmanuel Maurice d'Elbeuf, who was building a villa nearby. He arranged a private excavation that yielded a trove of statues and ornaments from the city's buried theatre, and soon after, these precious artifacts adorned his new residence. A generation later, Charles of Bourbon became King of Naples, and reports of these earlier finds stirred his royal curiosity. Seeking the prestige that comes with a grand collection of classical antiquities, he launched official excavations at Herculaneum in 1738. He entrusted the works to Roque Joaquín de Alcubierre, a Spanish military engineer in his service. Alcubierre approached the site as a mining operation. He drove long, deep tunnels through the hardened volcanic rock with the sole aim of recovering valuable antiquities for the king, paying little attention to documentation or preservation. A steady stream of artifacts soon flowed from the dark tunnels to the royal palace at nearby Portici. Lavish frescoes, intricate mosaics, and elegantly carved statues transformed the residence into a showcase of classical grandeur and helped shape the king's image as a patron of art and learning. But as the years passed, the stream of spectacular discoveries slowed, and Alcubierre was forced to look elsewhere. Hoping for renewed success, he turned his attention to La Civita, which he believed to be the site of ancient Stabio. The initial digs there, however, proved disappointing from a treasure-hunting perspective, offering few of the riches he had come to expect. Around the same time, Alcubierre's promotion to lieutenant colonel demanded greater attention to his military duties in Naples, prompting him to request an assistant to supervise the expanding excavations. His choice was a Swiss engineer named Carl Jakob Weber, who arrived in 1750 and took charge of the day-to-day work at the seemingly unpromising site of La Civita. Here, away from the deep tunnels of Herculaneum, Weber found a site that offered a different kind of possibility. Buried under a shallower layer of lighter pumice and ash, it was a city that did not need to be broken into, but could be slowly and carefully uncovered. While the primary goal remained the extraction of valuables for the king, Weber brought a scholar's eye to the task. He created the first detailed architectural plans of the ruins, and for the first time, he documented not just the grand public buildings, but the humble shop fronts and common homes of the city. He meticulously recorded the exact location of every object, understanding that each detail was a part of a larger story. Weber's work at La Civita marked a turning point, representing the first sustained effort to uncover and record a city in the open. It was the birth of a new discipline, a quiet shift from treasure hunting alone to a quest that sought both riches and understanding. The impact of Weber's new approach soon became evident. His open-air excavations revealed what the tunnels at Herculaneum never could. A long section of a major street came to light, its houses and shops still standing in silent rows. Beyond the walls, the Street of Tombs emerged, lined with ornate funerary monuments. But the definitive discovery came in 1763. While clearing the area around a city gate, his workmen uncovered a formal public inscription. Carved within its text were the clear and unambiguous words, Res Publica Pompeianorum, the state of the Pompeians. After 15 years of excavation, Weber's method had not only revealed the shape of the city, but had restored its name. As its true identity came to light, Pompeii became a sensation across Europe. At last, the buried city could be linked to the letters of Pliny the Younger, turning a long-forgotten ruin into a place of legend. Campania quickly became a destination for cultural pilgrimage, where scaling the summit of Vesuvius and exploring the excavation sites below attracted artists, scholars, and aristocrats on the grand tour. It offered them more than a glimpse of the ancient world. It allowed a step inside it. The cultural and intellectual capitals of Europe soon felt the impact of this new fascination. The sketches and artifacts brought back by grand tourers became essential visual references for artists and designers seeking to emulate antiquity. The Pompeian styles of interior decoration, marked by vivid colour palettes, elegant frescoes and mythological scenes, were meticulously copied in palaces and fashionable homes from London to St. Petersburg. This was the birth of neoclassicism, a movement in art, architecture, and design that would dominate European taste for a generation, all of it inspired by the art uncovered in this once-forgotten city. For more than a century, Pompeii remained the private possession of foreign kings. The promise of careful study that had begun under Weber faded once more into plunder. Treasures stripped from the ruins continued to fill royal palaces and serve as diplomatic gifts for visiting nobility. To each new monarch, Pompeii was a royal quarry, prized not for knowledge, but for prestige. Yet this era of exploitation was nearing its end. By the mid-19th century, a powerful wave of change was sweeping across the Italian peninsula. Fragmented kingdoms and states were being unified into a single nation. In 1861, the Kingdom of Italy was born, sparking a surge of national pride and a renewed commitment to reclaim and preserve the country's immense cultural legacy. Pompeii was no longer viewed as a royal prize. It had become a national symbol, one that called for a new kind of leadership. A fierce patriot and brilliant archaeologist, Giuseppe Fiorelli, was soon appointed as director of the excavations at Pompeii. He was no stranger to the site or its troubled past. Years before, he had spoken out against the corruption and negligence that had long plagued the excavations, demanding reform and accountability. His defiance cost him his freedom, and he spent months in prison for his convictions. Yet even there he refused to abandon his cause. Working from scattered reports and excavation notes, he compiled a 3-volume History of Pompeian Antiquities, an attempt to bring order to the site's fragmented record. Now, under the newly unified Kingdom of Italy, he was given the chance to put his vision into practice. Fiorelli immediately transformed the site from a royal quarry into a historical archive by reversing the old, destructive methods. He halted the practice of clearing streets and burrowing into houses from the ground up, and instead mandated that excavations proceed layer by layer from the top down, a crucial change that preserved the integrity of upper floors and prevented the building collapse. To complement this new field technique, Fiorelli applied an equal rigour to cataloguing. He divided the city into a grid of 9 regions, each with numbered blocks and doorways. This system ensured that not just every sculpture or fresco, but every artifact of daily life received its own precise address and could be studied in the future with a full understanding of its original location and context. During this slow, careful work, Fiorelli's team began to notice something unusual. As they cleared away layers of hardened ash, they occasionally broke into hollow cavities. At the base of these voids, human bones were often found. Fiorelli quickly understood what they were seeing. When the victims were engulfed by surges of fine, hot ash, their bodies eventually decomposed, but the hardened ash around them retained their forms. For 1800 years, the final tragic moments of Pompeii's residents had been preserved as empty space. Fiorelli devised a simple but ingenious method to recover them. When a void was found, they would pour liquid plaster into it. Once the plaster hardened, the surrounding ash was carefully removed. What emerged was extraordinary, the cast of a human being, captured with haunting clarity. The plaster casts transformed Pompeii's image, presenting it not merely as a source of classical beauty, but as a site of profound and relatable human tragedy. The revolution in archaeology had revealed the lives behind the ruins, but the very act of excavation that had brought the city back into the light created a tragic paradox. For nearly 2,000 years, Pompeii had been preserved precisely because it was buried. Once exposed to the elements, a second, slower destruction began. The same Campanian sun that had once ripened the vineyards began to beat down on the ancient frescoes, gradually fading their vibrant colours. Rain seeped into the ancient mortar, weakening the structures from within. In cracks and crevices, plant roots took hold, slowly prying apart walls that had stood for millennia. The 20th century brought new and more immediate dangers. In 1943, during the Second World War, Allied forces, believing the ruins were being used by German troops, dropped more than 150 bombs on the site. The blasts tore through ancient homes and public buildings, destroyed the site's museum, and left the ancient city scarred by modern conflict. In the post-war years, a new threat emerged. In a nation focused on recovery, the monumental and expensive task of preserving Pompeii became a low priority. As time passed, walls collapsed, frescoes faded, and the site deteriorated further in what came to be known as Pompeii's second death. International concern grew, and in 1997 Pompeii was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But it was a shocking event in 2010 that served as the final desperate wake-up call. After days of heavy rain, an entire building known as the House of the Gladiators simply collapsed into a pile of rubble. The news sparked outrage around the world. It was a clear and humiliating sign that the world was on the verge of losing Pompeii all over again, this time not to a force of nature, but to human negligence. In response, the Italian state, with support from the European Union, launched the Great Pompeii Project, a massive initiative dedicated to saving the ancient city. It marked a new era, one that brought together archaeologists, engineers, and scientists. Modern technology was deployed to stabilize crumbling walls, restore fading frescoes, and manage the flow of water that was the site's greatest enemy. And even though around a third of the city still lies buried, the focus has now shifted from aggressive excavation to careful, painstaking conservation. But much of this work still requires targeted digs, and through them, the city continues to reveal its secrets. Perhaps nothing illustrates this better than the mystery of the eruption's date. Pliny the Younger wrote that it began on August 24th, and for a very long time, no one thought to question him. But archaeologists uncovered a puzzle. They found traces of autumn fruits that could not have ripened in August. They also found jars of grape juice already sealed for fermentation, a process that began after the harvest in the fall. Even the victims offered clues. Many wore heavier woolen clothing, ill-suited to the heat of a Campanian summer. Taken together, these hints make an August date highly unlikely and point to a later autumn eruption. This shows that the story of Pompeii is not frozen in time but constantly refined, rewritten, and made richer by every new discovery. Today, Pompeii exists in a state of profound contrast. It is a dead city, its life extinguished in a single, catastrophic moment. And yet, it is intensely alive, drawing millions of visitors into its silent streets, making it one of the most visited archaeological sites in the world. It offers an experience no other place can, not just a glimpse of scattered monuments, but the chance to explore the complete fabric of an ancient city, to feel the rhythms of its daily life, still etched in stone. The city's ancient heart, the Forum, still opens as a grand public stage, framed by the remnants of its former power. The basilica's surviving columns still mark the footprint of Roman law and commerce. The ruined Capitolium and other temples recall the city's shifting loyalties to gods and to empire. Behind it, the Forum baths reveal the Roman ideal of communal life. The streets themselves pull you deeper into the city. The paving stones are worn smooth by ancient feet, and deep ruts carved by the wheels of countless carts show the paths of ancient commerce. These streets lead through entire neighbourhoods, revealing the city's social spectrum. Modest homes huddle together, their small rooms speaking of simple lives. Nearby, the lavish villas of the new elite open into grand atriums and gardens, their walls still glowing with vibrant frescoes that proclaim the wealth and ambition of their owners. The city's pulse feels paused in its bakeries. Their mills and ovens still stand ready to bake the next batch of bread. The thermopolia, too, seem poised to serve another hot meal to the busy crowd. In these streets, Pompeii's entire history can be read in stone. The remnants of the first Greek Doric temple recall the city's first engagement with the wider world. The massive Samnite city walls still bear the scars left by Sulla's siege engines. And at the city's edge, the amphitheatre still seems to echo the roar of the crowd from the infamous riot. But it is the plaster casts of the victims that make the past feel inescapably real, collapsing 2,000 years in an instant and confronting every visitor with the raw human tragedy of the city's final day. Yet the full story of that last day reaches far beyond Pompeii's walls. A short journey away, Herculaneum offers a quieter, more intimate, and perhaps more vivid experience. While Pompeii was crushed by falling pumice and ash, Herculaneum was filled by superheated mud flows that entombed the entire town in a deep shell of solid rock. Therefore, its buildings remained standing to a greater height, making it feel less like a ruin and more like an abandoned town. And unlike Pompeii's sprawling cityscape, Herculaneum's excavated area is far more compact, a dense core that can be explored in hours rather than days. Much of the ancient town still lies buried beneath the modern city, and its magnificent theatre, the site of the very first discoveries, remains accessible only through the original dark tunnels carved in the 18th century, offering a haunting subterranean experience of the site's first treasure hunters. But to see those very treasures, the delicate wonders recovered from these dead cities and the surrounding villas, you must leave the ruins behind. The most intricate mosaics and frescoes, the finest bronze and marble statues, and the intimate objects of daily life now reside in the National Archaeological Museum of Naples. Yet the main artifact of this entire story, the mountain itself, still looms above everything, an active giant in a state of temporary repose. Its slopes, once covered in the vineyards that made Pompeii rich, are now home to a sprawling metropolis of towns and villages. More than 3 million people live in the vicinity of the volcano, with over 700,000 in the immediate danger zone, making it one of the most densely populated and dangerous volcanic areas on the planet. Scientists monitor the mountain constantly, tracking the slightest tremor, the smallest change in the gases that rise from its crater. They believe that Vesuvius is overdue for another major eruption, an event that, despite modern evacuation plans, could be catastrophic. But life here continues, just as vibrant and chaotic as it was 2,000 years ago. The millions who live around the modern bay do so not because they've forgotten the past, but because this is their home, and roots often run deeper than fear. In the end, Pompeii is more than just a tragedy preserved in ash. It is a lasting testament to the stubborn human impulse to build, to thrive, and to live fully, even on ground that they know can betray them.